Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Shepherd's Corner. Having conversations with Archbishop J, as we always do, every single week. He spends time with us and he has a conversation with us. And he normally takes us on the topic of the day. And we're about to celebrate emancipation. Yeah, emancipation. So we want to know, well, what must we do for true freedom? Because emancipation is supposed to talk to us about freedom, what we must do for true freedom. But the question here is, what is freedom? And what do you understand by freedom? And I think he wants to take us down that path. Good evening, Archbishop Charles Jason Gordon. How are you?
I am doing real well. And I want to start with a spoiler. When the Son of God sets you free, then you are free indeed.
Wow. Again, yeah.
Starting with a spoiler. When the Son of God sets you free, then you are free indeed. So if we're talking true freedom, I'm starting with my spoiler alert. And I'm starting right there. Well, when the Son of God sets you free, then you are free indeed.
Well, take us down this journey, because it looks like you're carrying us down a journey in explaining what is freedom.
Correct. So for the young nations of the Caribbean, August the 1st is historic. In the Caribbean psyche, it's a date that we all have to remember, and not just remember, but celebrate. We have to celebrate it because it marks one of those fundamental departures from and towards something else. So what was that date, August the 1st? Well, on that date, 188 years ago, the British Parliament brought into law the emancipation of the African slave who lived in these islands. And that is a major initiative and milestone in the history of the Caribbean. It's a major initiative because up until that moment, the way in which African slaves were seen was that they were not human beings, they were not people, they were chattel, which means that they were property of another person, and it means that they, as property of another person, they really had no sense of their themselves and charting their future and charting their destiny. And so, all of that is quite something. So we have to hear before August 1st, 1834, that the African slave was property. And that's how it was in these parts of the world. After August 1st, the African slave was then legally freed. But the mindset of 400 years of slavery didn't just change overnight. That's what we're working with. How do we, what is freedom? What is freedom? And how do we come to it? So with these little words of introduction, I wanna really ask, what is really true freedom? Even after the British Parliament in 1834 enacted this law of the freedom or the emancipation of the African slave, they then said, but you know something, for your own good, you had to work for another 4 years as an apprentice. So the law was enacted, but 4 more years was spent now in apprenticeship. So they here they get freedom, but the conditions remain pretty much the same for the next 4 years. And of course, it was claimed that this was for the good of the African, for the good of the slave. Well, all right. But what I wanted to hear is, this was a really bizarre time in the social history of the whole Caribbean. And we are unique in the New World. America and the Caribbean share this very dark stain of chattel slavery that really dominated the whole landscape of this New World. It wasn't so much in Latin America, but certainly where there was sugar, as in our part of the world, and where there was cotton, as in North America. But, you know, this is the backdrop against which we are asking ourselves, what must we do for true freedom? What must we do for true freedom?
Now, you said that it was enacted, it was passed, the Emancipation Act was passed in 1834, but still they had to hold on to them for 4 years for the so-called betterment of the African slave, while they still work there.
So, you see, when you have free labor, it's really impossible. It's like a drug. And they were addicted. It's like us and the oil. We raising the temperature in the planet, but we don't care. It's like a drug. And they couldn't see the world in any other way except through that way. So although the British Parliament enacted the Emancipation Act, the plant just could not let go. So the 4-year period of apprenticeship was just another tactic to get the free labor. And it was another tactic to keep the slave in bondage and to keep the status quo as it was. There was no freedom. Legally, you were freed, but there's no freedom.
Do you think that they use this kind of period, this 4-year period of, you call it apprenticeship, to basically work out where they could get the labor from? Now, we know the indentured laborers came right after. So, you know, you're looking at these kind of guys and you figure, well, here what's going on. Somebody had to work these cane fields. Somebody has to work these cotton plantations. Somebody have to, you know. So we need some time to see how we could get some labor.
And the East Indian came in not too long after.
Right.
And, you know, filled the spaces that were necessary, especially here in Trinidad and Tobago. In other parts of the region where they had sufficient slaves, they didn't bring in indentured labor. Trinidad was the southernmost. And so it was the least populated. It was only in the 1770s, through a cellular population, that a couple thousand people came to Trinidad. Before that, the population here was 2,000-3,000 Spaniards. It was real small, huh?
Yeah.
But after the cellular, a lot of French came in and settled here with their slaves. And that's when Trinidad started more seriously. And then right after that, the British came in and took control of the colony. So by the time we came to 1834, the British were clearly in control of the colony and of a lot of the region. So the law enacted was for here, but we still did not have enough labor for the kind of land that we had and for the kind of expansion that was possible. And so part of the holding of the slave in apprenticeship was supposed to be for their own good and preparing them for freedom and preparing them for this and that and the other. This time in Jamaica, long before emancipation, the Maroons got away and created communities in the hinterlands of Jamaica, in the mountain areas, and they were growing their own crop and they were growing their own food. One estimate was that they had as much money circulating in the hands of the Maroon community as they had circulating in the rest of Jamaica.
Wow.
But that there was this informal economy between the slave and the Maroons. They had a lot of money circulating, even in a time called slavery. So it's not as if these people didn't know how to take care of themselves and didn't know how to manage freedom. The Maroons in Jamaica showed that they were just fine. They were just fine. They didn't need no help on it. But okay, so this is what we're dealing with in terms of a social process. So no freedom, and emancipation ends. Emancipation comes. Apprenticeship ends 1838. And what was the next tactic? The next tactic was, well, we'll keep the wages of the labor real low, because there's an excess of labor.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're also going to do is we're going to keep the cost of land really high. And they kept it high in two ways: by artificially inflating the land price, but also by saying you can't buy a small parcel of land. You can't buy a 5,000 square foot of land. You have to buy X number of acres, which means that the man working on a real small wage can't afford to buy that amount of land. So we keep him landless, and we keep him as a laborer, and we keep him as a dependent in a new form of slavery that is really not much better than what slavery was in the first place. The same overseers, so they're still beating them. They're still treating them all the same way. Don't mind they talk freedom. There's no freedom as yet.
Now, I mean, there's another form of exploitation, because they don't really have freedom. You're controlling them. You're controlling them because once you control the money and the wages, then you also control the cost or the price of land and how land is to be divided. Then you made it impossible.
Correct. And so it's just another mechanism to keep the ex-slave enslaved through a new form of slavery. That's all it is. They ain't varnish it or make it look good. That's all it is. So this new form of exploitation kept the person outside of meaningful participation in the society. Because once you can't own your land, it means you have to live somewhere, which means you have to be a laborer of somebody. And that was the logic that worked so good for a while. But I want you to consider for a moment the status of an indentured Irish person who was sent here because of Cromwell and the penal laws in Ireland, and because the Irish were Catholic. And many people don't understand that the Catholics were also emancipated in the 1800s. People don't understand that in England, to be Catholic was to be illegal in England. So, but leave that follow.
Was illegal. Was illegal.
Illegal.
Yeah. Wow.
If you were a priest in Ireland or a deacon in Ireland and you were caught, you're tried and sometimes put to death. Many of the young men who had vocations used to go across to Belgium to train as priests. And sometimes on their way back into England, they were caught and killed before even exercising priesthood. But that's another story. Leave that one alone for now. The indentured Irish came to the British West Indies, and at the same time as the slave trade. So these two systems were happening parallel. They agreed to work for 7 years in exchange for their passage, housing, and food during the time that they were here in the islands. At the end, they were given either land or money that they could use to go back home. So parallel, same time, but when their tenure was up, they received something. that gave them the foundation for their next step. And either they would receive land or they would receive money, and they would use either one in whichever way that they thought was best. But, you know, the slave received no compensation for loss of their life, for loss of their time, for being in forced labor. There was no compensation for the slave whatsoever. The planter received compensation at the end of slavery.
Hold on a minute.
Because
the slave received nothing, but the planter received compensation because
the planter received compensation. The slave received nothing at all. Nothing at the end of slavery. Nothing. And so this is, I wanted to see how bizarre this is, okay? I wanted to see how bizarre this is, because it's you know, we ask, why is the African community so behind in Trinidad and Tobago or in the Caribbean, or why is it so? Well, we have to understand how bizarre this is. So you have the East Indian, they come at the end of, the Irish, they come, they get food, they get housing, and at the end, they get money or land. If they got their land, if they took their land, they could start building, have a small peasantry, and have a successful living. The intention for emancipation was never freedom for the ex-slave. And I think we have to at least acknowledge that. The intention for the Irishman was at the end of his indentureship, 7 years, he would be able to pick up his life and build a life here in the islands. For the ex-slave, there was never an intention of freedom. And at least let's be honest about that. He or she was seen as property, and in this lay the logic of all of the social interactions around the African in Trinidad and Tobago. And that is really the lens through which I want us to start looking at emancipation.
This is almost like they were literally destining them for death or for poverty.
No, this is diabolical.
But that's what I mean. They want to kill them.
This is diabolical. There was never the intention of human flourishing. There was the intention of keeping them in subservient positions and keeping the African in positions that they would never climb out of the hole into which they were put through slavery. And no hand was extended to lift in terms of the law and in terms of society. Many individuals extended helping hands to individuals that allowed other things to happen. Another time I'll tell you about Abbe Derrida, the first local priest in Trinidad. Same time as Monsignor Farfado de los Gordos, but Derrida started a school for the slave, for the children of the slaves. But that's another story. We'll talk about that another time. Let's keep going here, because the logic of the whole thing was never to the freedom of the ex-slave. It just was not, it was just not there. You know, and whether you talk about the Irish or you talk about the indentured East Indian, who likewise came for a period of time and did their service, and at the end of their service, they got land or money also. So you could have a slave who worked a plantation for 20-something years, emancipation came and got no land no money, no compensation, no startup, no nothing. The planter got compensation. We have to hear how crazy the thinking is.
Yeah, well, you use the right word. The right word you used was diabolical.
Yeah.
Then you can see why, in some cases you have the African so bitter.
Correct.
When he looks at the past and what has been, thrust on his race. And a lot of other things there we could talk about, because he continues to look at himself negatively, the color of his skin, the texture of his hair, you know what I mean?
And the whole social history is a baggage.
Yes.
It is a baggage. So I just naming these, okay?
Gotcha.
So freedom, question mark. Freedom, question mark. Let's look at the other side for a moment, okay? Over the last 188 years, the descendant of the ex-slave have achieved excellence in every sphere of endeavor that you can ever imagine. Scholarship, government, business, education, priesthood, ministry, sports, beauty, science, technology, just to name a few areas where we have ex-slaves who have been world leaders in each of these spheres of endeavor. I mean, little Trinidad and Tobago, and whether it is in beauty or in sports, we have produced the best. And the number of scholars that we have who have done pioneering work in all kinds of fields. So what we have to dispel is the notion that there is something inherently inferior in one race as opposed to another. We have to dispel that notion. And when we look and see the problem of Trinidad and Tobago today, we can't start from the question of race to construct the answer to that problem. We have to start from the social history and the mentality of our Trinidad and Tobago landscape if we want to have an adequate answer to the challenge that we face right now in Trinidad and Tobago. And I'm asking freedom. I hope you're in the question mark.
Yeah.
Freedom. So once we can see that the ex-slave in the last 188 years has excelled in every sphere of endeavor, we have to bring to light the whole area or thinking of racism. And then we have to call a lie every way in which we stigmatize the African for underperformance in our society, and especially in the communities that are underperforming.
You're watching Shepherd's Corner. What must we do for true freedom? And that's the question. And Archbishop J is taking us through a little bit of history so that we can understand what the African slave went through, what the African nation went through in the context of so-called emancipation, because we're going to be celebrating Emancipation Day. So I want you to, just to keep this, and to share it with your young people. Share it with your young sons and daughters so that they understand an aspect of their own history and that they too can rise.
Despite all the odds, the descendants have broken through the shackles and managed to chart their own destiny. Despite all odds,
Yeah.
Despite all odds.
Big odds.
Yeah. Within 100 years of slavery, you know, many ex-slaves, the descendants of many ex-slaves broke through glass ceilings. Within 150 years, you know, you couldn't hold back the ex-slave in these wonderful islands we call the Caribbean. The breaking through the odds, the breaking of the shackles, and managing to chart a destiny that was so far above expectation of anyone who was living in the plantation system 150 years before. That is remarkable. 188 years on, and we're seeing now that the descendants of the former slaves have been as good as any other people in any sphere of endeavor you can name. There are ex-slaves or descendants of ex-slaves who have been at the top of those spheres: music, art, sports, technology, science, medicine, you name it. Given opportunity, this has happened. And I'm saying this to ask the one question: what is true freedom? And what must we do for true freedom? Because for me, that's what I'm looking at, but I'm casting it in the historical backdrop, just so that we could understand the odds of anyone of African descent who has achieved significantly. We have to understand what odds, the odds against which they were fighting to be able to make the achievement, which is different from the East Indian who was given their land, or the Irish who were given their land. The ex-slave was actually not just they were not helped, they were mitigated against and hit against in every way possible to keep the system of slavery going even after emancipation was proclaimed by law.
I see that like in your last, when we dealt with emancipation the last time, you know, you talked about Trinidad and Tobago in the context of the Black Power movement of the 1970s.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we had a number of people asking for copies of the show, you know, and we passed it on to them. But here you're talking about the independence movements of the 60s, culminating with the Black Power in the 1970s.
Correct.
And you're seeing that there were significant moments when true freedom looked, now I notice the words you use carefully, it looked very possible. Then something happened. What's this? Where are you taking us here?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, you know, because I think in the 1960s, there was a ferment in our region, in our world, that for the first time, the descendants of the ex-slave felt that freedom was within grasp. Then something happened. By the 1980s and 1990s, they got washed up on the sand. And I keep asking myself, what is the something that happened? The explanation of that would take you, that's a whole 5 shows in itself. That's my doctoral dissertation. We ain't going on that road today, not today. But what I will say is, in the late 1970s and certainly 80s and 90s, we seem to slip backwards into shackles without a struggle and without a fight.
Wait. You're saying something here that I want people to hear. I am trying to digest this too. We seem to slip backwards into the shackles without a struggle and a fight.
Yeah.
We were so blinded.
Mm-hmm. Somehow we toss the plot and the path to freedom, we tossed it out somehow. And this is important. I want you to think of your grandmother. She had 2 cents to rub together.
No.
But she had a value system.
Absolutely.
That you knew.
Yeah.
If you, sir, play man for her and thought you could get away with less than excellence in your life. Finish my sentence.
No, I can't finish that.
Finish my sentence.
I still feel, listen.
You're still feeling it, eh?
I still feeling it. You know, we had a guava tree in the yard, you understand?
Say no more.
I just don't want to say anymore.
Say no more. My point is that there was a time when the community expected excellence.
Yes.
From every child. And being poor was not an excuse of mediocrity. That was in the 1960s. Being poor wasn't an excuse for mediocrity. And in fact, in those days, the child of the maid would get uniforms and books from the children in the house. And part of the duty of the madam of the house was to ensure that the maid's children had what was required for education and that they were doing good. And I know instances when the maid's children started to give trouble and the madam in the house said, bring them here for me. And we wouldn't continue that story. But let's just say, I know instances where they turned back from bad to good and went back on the right path again.
Yeah.
We live in a different worldview. And in the 60s and early 70s, you know, there was a march to true freedom. And I would say in Trinidad and in much of the Caribbean, that was a high point of our civilization. As bad as it was, as crazy as it was, as bizarre as it was in so many different ways, it was a high point because we had the clearest path towards the aspiration of true freedom. Okay. Then something happened. Then something happened. Whether we look at the recent violence in the schools, rise of gangs or gang violence or murder or domestic violence or the number of prisoners in jail without a trial or bail or the high levels of hopelessness in our East Port of Spain communities, we have to come to the same conclusion. Emancipation is still coming. That we have too many people locked into systems that are so difficult to break out of on their own that we have to say emancipation is still coming. It hasn't reached yet. That's the title of a book by Cartwright Davis. Emancipation is still coming. And it's a beautiful title. It is a painful title, but it's a true title. We have not come to true freedom as yet. When you see the total disrespect for people, for each other in the street, in the media, in parliament, in the business community, in the church, in the mandir, in the mosque, in wherever you go, you know emancipation is still coming. Emancipation is still coming. And that's my question. What must we do for true freedom? That's really what must we do for true freedom? What must we do for true freedom?
I see you're going down a Bob Marley route here.
You know, you're trying to preempt me, man.
I know you like Bob, you see. I know you're a Bob man.
What I'm going to tell you. One of Bob's greatest songs was Redemption Song. And it has a wonderful story to it. He had written the whole album, you know. And he came to Chris Blackwell and he brought everything to Chris. And Chris looked at it. He looked at the songs, he looked at the lineup, he looked at the music scores, he looked at everything. And he said, look, something missing from this album. Go and find it. He said, no. He said, I'm telling you, something missing from the album. And then one day he wrote Redemption Song.
Wow. That was the missing thing.
That was what was missing. It is his anthem. Anybody who knows Bob Marley or seen him perform, Redemption Song is always part of the lineup. It is his most performed, and you know, it's not really reggae. But it's his anthem. So I went to Bob Marley to ask the question, what must we do for true freedom? And the answer is striking. Eh? So in his classic Redemption Song, Bob Marley says, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our mind. So there is physical chattel slavery.
Yeah.
There is social constructions that create slavery and bondage, stopping the former slaves from economic advancement. But Bob Marley talks about mental slavery. There is nobody chaining up your head, you know.
Yeah.
But your head chained up proper. Eh? Your head is properly well chained up. Emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our mind. You know, I'll tell you something. When I was studying for the doctorate in England, I got an invitation to present at a musicology conference in Leeds. Mm-hmm. And I worked on Redemption Song. And when I finished the first verse, I had already written 20-something pages of academic prose on the first verse of Redemption Song. It worried me.
It worried you?
Yes.
What were the rest?
Well, because I said, by the time I finish the song, it will be about 70 pages.
Yeah.
But I stopped it there. But doing this, I went back to this song, Emancipate Yourself from Mental Slavery. It sounds like an ancient heresy of pulling yourself up by your bootstrap.
Right.
Not needing God. That you have to do this act of emancipation must come from you. That's how it sounds on your first read through the text. And that's kind of why I didn't go to it and never really thought about it deeply until this week. Yeah. Because it sounded like an ancient heresy of self-emancipation where we of ourselves can do it. But the problem is that well, okay, all right, yeah, but if we could emancipate ourselves, we would have done so a long time ago. Yeah. 188 years past, you know. Some have not. And the question is why? And what must we do for true freedom? Freedom is not an act of will, you know. You can't pull yourself up by your bootstraps to become free. Nor is it something we can do for ourselves. You can't pull yourself up to be free. That's the ancient heresy. When I read the verse in its context, something else emerged for me.
Again, I'm excited now. Because pulling myself up from my bootstraps to telling me something else happened. Let me hear it.
Something else emerged for me. They gave me a whole different perspective on the song. Marley continued this verse, have no fear of atomic energy, because none of them could stop at the time. So wait. The concept, the context of emancipate yourself from mental slavery is this other line, have no fear of atomic energy. Don't worry about the big nations and the big colonizing nations, because none of them could stop at the time. And what is that a reference to? That's a reference to only God who can stop the time.
Yeah.
So ultimately, the hope in the emancipation comes back to the God who alone we must fear, which is very biblical, huh? Don't fear him who could kill you, maim you, oppress you. Fear him rather who after do that could throw you into hell.
Right.
So it's actually a swing in this other verse that is ultimately speaking about God as the one who must be feared, not in the sense of being afraid of, but giving reverence to. And therefore, the emancipation has to be read from this context of God as the ultimate source of the emancipation. Now, when you come to that, here Marley is speaking in the context of the ultimate, the God who we ultimately must be trusting in. When you read the lyrics again, Marley has emancipation in the plural, you know. With ourselves.
Yes.
Emancipate yourselves, plural, not singular, for mental slavery. So when you see the plural in the sentence, ourselves, that is opposed to the individual effort and individualism that comes from the atomic energy people.
Yes. Wow. Yeah, this is a blow mind. This is a blow mind. This is a blow mind.
So it is a contrast between those who in the big nations with all the atomic energy who are into the individualism, but he's saying emancipate yourself from mental slavery, none but ourselves, plural. None but ourselves, plural. And by moving the agent of emancipation to the plural form, he's moving against the greatest slavery of the modern era and of late Western capitalism, which is this rugged individualism that we have bought hook, line, and sinker. And once you understand Marley's shift to the emancipation, the agent of emancipation being the collectivity, ourselves, as opposed to ourself, the individual, you understand that we're dealing here with a different worldview from the Western worldview that has taken us very wrong from the late 1970s until now.
This is deep. You know, I almost say, I and I Rastafari.
and the I and I is that signifier that it is not about me alone, it's about the collectivity, because we are also deeply interconnected. Right. We can't find emancipation on our own, is what Marley is saying. Nor is the individual the agent of emancipation. It is something that the individual must do as part of a collective. And this is important. Hang on to your bootstraps. Buckle up.
I buckle up a long time.
Buckle up. to emancipate ourselves is a communal activity that we must all commit to. I want to go back to your grandmother.
Yes.
Because she lived in a world where
Yes.
when the neighbor didn't have what was required, the little that she did not have was shared.
I saw it every single lunchtime.
The little that she did not have was being shared. And when she didn't have, the little that the neighbor didn't have was being shared.
Yes.
And it is that sense of the collectivity, that sense of community, that sense of the common bond of us together that Mali is pushing us to look at again, as opposed to the notion of freedom that comes from the late capitalist era, where I have the freedom to do what I want, when I want, how I want, regardless of anybody else. And I'm saying that that is mental slavery. And that mental slavery is what went wrong and why we've landed up in this position that we are in now, where corruption has been so rife throughout our whole culture. But this is akin to Ubuntu, the African philosophy, which really translates, I am because we are. So this is a Ubuntu, this is a well-known philosophy, or humanity towards others, a turn to the community recognizing that I can only have humanity if we all have humanity.
And that's so beautiful. I mean, and that's even in the context of, I'm a lecturer. So, and it's strange that we should be talking on this, because as part of what we teach is work as a team, look out for others, and we will all be looking out for each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really, really interesting. If we look out for one another, we all
look out for each other.
Yeah.
As opposed to I looking out for number one.
Yes.
And if I had to climb on your back, well, so be it.
Yeah.
And a big part of what I believe went wrong, the turn in the 1970s, really was a turn to rugged materialism.
Yeah.
Where we get rich or die trying. I think that line from 50 Cent, said it clearest. That's a creed for which everybody started to live. But this communitarian turn, I only have humanity if we all have humanity. I can prosper only if I work for us all to prosper. That turn is really where I see Mali departing from the self-help literature, mm-hmm. or from the self-help liberation theories, and entering into something that is much older and far wiser and much deeper, which is far more biblical. I am only if we are. Mm-hmm. 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 Mali gives us the most fundamental challenge to true freedom. The most fundamental challenge. That rugged individualism in the West, where we get rich or we die trying, has led to the moral decay, to the social decay, to the moral bankruptcy that we are facing, to both corruption and hedonism, is fed by this false philosophy of the self above all others.
I kind of worry they're doing that statement, because you have so many people who say, make Trinidad great again. Let me just leave that in the context right there. Forgetting that it's Trinidad and Tobago, it's the Caribbean, we all have to look after each other, and we will all rise together.
I am because we are.
Yeah.
I am because we are. Black people who have made it economically have not easily turned to work tirelessly for those who have been trapped in the prison of poverty and underdevelopment. I know some who have,
Yeah, me too.
I know some, and who roll up their sleeves and have contributed immensely.
Yeah.
But we have too many who have made it, who have not used their considerable advantage to the I am because we are.
Yeah.
To giving back to the community, especially to the most underprivileged parts of that community, and help raise those communities out of. And that would have been to a whole new level of freedom for both sides of that relationship. And that's where the false philosophy has, I make it, and if I make it, you should make it too. Well, luck and chance, privilege, birth, where you got to go to school, all had so much to do with you making it.
Mm-hmm.
Many times a single mother who run that family with an iron rod and ensured every child got the kind of discipline and education, allow the next generation to make it. But now we all have a responsibility to each one of us. I am because we are. I only make it when we all make it.
I only make it when we all make it. I want that is resounding in my head.
I only make it when we all make it. That is where I want to go. Now, what is worse is the behavior of those leaders of all colors, religions, and persuasions who have put themselves above the national development. That's even worse. Where my creaming off the top is more important than we making it together. So they feather the nest and we have money for 5 generations. But it will never profit because the money will burn because we have not made it together. Therefore, we don't have a stable society.
Yeah.
Each of us has to make a decision, but it will only work when we all work together for true freedom. We have to work together for true freedom. Each of us has a choice. That is what free will gives us, choice. But we can only arrive together, Ubuntu. You can't arrive on your own. Our choice comes from the deepest, innermost part of our being, that place where we shut the door and we go there to pray. Matthew 6:6. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
It has to come from that deep place. And that's where true freedom comes from. Not from our activity, but from residing in that deep place, going to that deep place, forced into that deep place, where we meet our maker and get the opportunity for making new decisions. I want to talk about a guy, his name is Viktor Franco. He lived between 1905 and 1997. He was a Jewish psychiatrist, but he was in Auschwitz during the Second World War as a prisoner of war. And in the face of great indignity and sorrow in the camp, he discovered what he called the last human freedom. He said, everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, which is to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. This is in his book, Man's Search for Freedom.
Yeah.
Now this is very profound.
It is massively profound, you know.
Because
yes,
Viktor Frankl in the concentration camp stripped. This is a man who was a renowned psychiatrist, seeing the elite of the elite in Vienna and having a practice that everybody wants to get to see him, now is stripped down naked with nothing in a concentration camp, eking out an existence from day to day. But in that camp, he comes to this great insight that becomes logotherapy and becomes a major school of psychiatry.
Wow.
And what was his insight? They could take everything from me, but it's the last true freedom that the human has. And no one can take that freedom from you. You mightn't have 2 cents to rub together. Everything might be against you. The laws might be oppressive, and people might be racist. And the business community might be unfeeling. But that doesn't take away the last true freedom, which is the attitude that you bring into your life and the choices you make about how you will live with what you have. In other words, you mightn't like the hand that life deal you, but you play in that hand with everything you have.
I just love the, I'm gonna quote you, to choose one's attitude in any given circumstance, to choose one's own way. And and sometimes, we crumble under the pressure.
Mm-hmm.
We crumble under the pressure. But here he is saying that this is the one thing, the last of human freedoms. And yes, we are the ones to make that choice. How are we going to respond? How do we respond?
So when we're talking about freedom,
yes,
it's not the freedom to get on bad, wind down the place and mash it up, or go naked and dirty, or dirty and naked, or wherever it is.
No, it's jam naked.
Okay.
and stink and dirty.
Right. So that's not freedom. That is part of the mental slavery that has kept us as a people enslaved and held us back from true development. That's part of the mental slavery. Now, what Marley is speaking about and what Viktor Frankl is speaking about is a pathway to true development, true freedom. That everything could be against you, but don't become a victim. Victimhood is a choice that you make, and you alone could make that choice. Nobody can make you into a victim. You choose. If you are a victim, you choose to be a victim because you can make another choice. And our ancestors made hard choices in the context of slavery when they had no options, no legal rights, no nothing. And they chose to make slavery impossible to continue by making it more and more expensive. They chose, they used the little last freedom they had to bring the whole system down. And we too can choose. You want to know what true freedom is? It comes from that deep inner place inside of us where you make the choice of the way you're coming out into the world and what you want to be. And it's not emancipating yourself from mental slavery by pulling yourself up by the bootstrap. Is by going into that deep inner place and finding in there the courage, the God-given courage to respond to whatever is in your life. With that freedom.
You submit yourself to the one who can stop the time.
by the surrender to the one who can stop the time, you surrender now to the courage and to the true freedom that comes only from inside. You want to know about inner freedom? That is it. But here's the genius of Marley. His second, and I think his most important clue from the song. We must choose to be human actors and not victims of our circumstance. We have to choose to be human actors, not victims of our circumstance. And that's true inner freedom. We got to stop this litany of victimhood that we like to recite to one another. We got to stop it. And we got to go to that inner place and find that inner courage. the one who could stop at the time, and then live out of the freedom that we have gotten from him who set us free. Because when the Son of Man set you free, I tell you, you're free indeed. So we have to summon the human courage to choose. And if we believe we are made in the image and likeness of God, then we believe we have been given free will. And the real question remains, what will you do with your freedom? Will you fight or will you flee? You see, William Wallace, the character in Braveheart, asked his countrymen this question: what will you do with your freedom? And they were up against all odds. The nobility were making individual deals and betraying the people in every single way. And he concluded that on their deathbeds, they would give anything just for the chance to come back to that battlefield and here and now, and to tell their enemies that they may take our lives, but you cannot take our freedom. You might take our lives, but you cannot take our freedom. Freedom is the most precious gift that we have. And I unfortunately believe that we've been squandering it for wealth and pleasure and power. Freedom is the deepest part of the human that can ever, in any age, and it cannot be taken away from us, but we're giving it away. Free willy, we're giving it away. What will you do with your freedom?
What's the key message?
Emancipation, I think, is still coming. The challenge resides in the fundamental choice that each one of us has to make for true freedom or for self-gain and individual rights or pleasures. So I'm asking everybody, reflect on how you use your freedom. Is it for personal gain, or is it for the progress of us as a people? And let's make a commitment that we're going to help one person. One person. And let's see where that takes us. Scripture, Matthew 16:24-27. Anybody who wants to be my disciple? Let them take up their cross. Deny themselves, take up their cross, and let them follow.
Archbishop G, I knew it was going to be powerful. What must we do for true freedom? Say a prayer for us on the eve of Emancipation.
Father, we thank you for your tremendous love, and we pray, oh God, that you may open wide our heart to all that you want for us. Give us grace, Lord. Give us grace that we may see a pathway to true freedom for our people in Trinidad and Tobago, for us as a whole Caribbean. That as we search out true freedom, that we may find the way to you. We make our prayer through Christ our Lord.
Amen. Well, another wonderful conversation with Archbishop J. Conversating with the Shepherd. Look on, we're on, remember, Thursday night, Sunday, actually throughout the night. Get your Catholic news, listen to us on 95.5. God bless you. Have a wonderful, and don't forget, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. Thank you, Archbishop J.
God bless.
God bless.